Marcus had always been different from the others in his class. While most of his classmates came from wealthy families and showed off expensive clothes, flashy cars, and the latest gadgets, Marcus lived a simple life. He was a quiet young man who always sat at the back of the classroom, taking notes carefully and leaving as soon as lectures were over. Many people didn't know much about him, except for one thing everyone whispered about. He was a single father. He had a little boy at home, and he often rushed out after class to pick him up from daycare, because Marcus didn't talk much and didn't join parties or outings. His classmates assumed he was poor. They noticed how he wore the same pair of shoes almost every day and how his backpack was old and worn. They didn't know anything about his past, but they judged him based on what they could see. To them, Marcus was just another struggling student trying to get through college while raising a child alone. One afternoon, a few of the most arrogant classmates gathered in the campus cafe, laughing loudly and making fun of others, as they often did. They loved to show off their expensive watches, talk about their parents' companies, and brag about the luxury holidays they went on. Then one of them, a tall boy named Ryan, pointed at Marcus, who was quietly walking past with his notebook in hand. "Look at him," Ryan smirked. "Always looking so serious, like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders." Another classmate, Jessica, laughed. "He probably does. I mean, he's a single dad, right? How does he even survive? I bet he barely pays rent." They all laughed, not out of real humor, but out of arrogance. They saw Marcus as someone below them, someone who didn't belong in their world of wealth and privilege. That was when Ryan came up with an idea, cruel idea, he thought would be funny. "Let's invite him to my house this weekend," Ryan said with a grin. "We'll throw a small party. Just us? Imagine how awkward he'll be around us. It'll be hilarious." Jessica giggled. "Oh my God, yes. He'll probably show up in the same jacket he always wears. And he'll sit in the corner while we're all dressed up." They all agreed, thinking it would be entertaining to watch Marcus feel out of place. None of them wanted to be his friend or get to know him. This invitation wasn't about kindness. It was about ridicule. They wanted to make him feel small so they could feel bigger. That same evening, Ryan walked up to Marcus after class. Marcus was packing his books quickly, clearly eager to leave. Ryan put on a fake friendly smile. "Hey Marcus," he said casually. "We're having a little get-together at my place this Saturday night. You should come, you know? Hang out with us." Marcus looked surprised. No one from this group had ever spoken to him like that before. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was some kind of joke. But Ryan's smile seemed sincere, at least on the surface. Sure," Marcus said quietly. "Thanks." Ryan clapped him on the back like they were old friends. "Cool, it'll be fun." As Marcus left the classroom, Ryan turned back to his friends and winked. They snickered quietly behind Marcus's back, already imagining how out of place he would look standing in their designer clothes and sipping expensive drinks. Marcus, on the other hand, walked out into the evening air, feeling a mix of confusion and curiosity. He wasn't used to being invited anywhere. Most people ignored him or treated him like he didn't exist. Maybe, he thought, they were finally trying to include him. Maybe they wanted to be friends. He smiled faintly at the thought. He had spent so long focusing on raising his son, building his business in silence, and studying that he had forgotten what it felt like to be invited to something. Part of him was nervous. He didn't like crowds, and he never knew what to say around people who only talked about luxury and fashion. But another part of him thought it might be good to try, so he decided he would go. He would attend their party, just for a while, just to see what it was like. Meanwhile, Ryan and his friends were busy planning their little joke. They talked about how they would all wear their most expensive outfits, how they would talk about luxury cars and private jets, and how they would watch Marcus squirm and feel uncomfortable. They were so sure of themselves, so blinded by their own pride, that not one of them stopped to wonder if Marcus might not be what he seemed. They had no idea that the man they thought was poor was actually running a fast-growing tech company, quietly from home, and that the fortune he had built in just a few years would one day shock them all. For now, they only saw a quiet single father who didn't fit into their world. And for Marcus, it was simply an invitation, a chance to be seen. He didn't know they had invited him to laugh at him. And they didn't know they had just invited a man worth $100 million. Saturday evening came with a soft golden glow from the setting sun. Ryan's house stood like a small mansion at the edge of town-tall glass windows, shining cars parked neatly in the driveway, and music drifting from inside. The classmates had been preparing all afternoon, dressing in their finest clothes and spraying expensive perfumes, excited not only about the party, but also about their secret plan. They had imagined Marcus walking through the door looking nervous and lost, wearing his usual plain clothes, holding himself stiff like he didn't belong. They laughed at the thought even before he arrived. Inside, the living room sparkled. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling and the smell of rich food filled the air. Ryan's friends were already scattered around, holding glasses of sparkling drinks, their voices full of confidence. Every word seemed like a performance. "Did you see the new car Dad bought me?" One boy bragged loudly. "Oh, I'm flying to Paris next weekend," Jessica said, flipping her hair with pride. They were all trying to outshine each other and waited eagerly for Marcus to arrive so they could quietly crush him with their arrogance. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang. For a moment, the room fell silent. Ryan smirked and went to open the door. Marcus stood there, a tee. He wore a clean but simple dark shirt and the same old jacket he always wore to class. His shoes were polished, but they were worn from years of use. In his hand, he carried nothing, not even a gift. "Hey Marcus, you made it," Ryan said, his voice overly cheerful, almost mocking. "Thanks for inviting me," Marcus said quietly. Stepping inside, as soon as he entered, he felt dozens of eyes on him. The chatter stopped for just a second and then started again, only this time softer, lower. He could hear the whispers even as he walked past. "Look at his jacket." Someone snickered. "Did he seriously come here wearing that?" Another whispered. "He looks like he's about to go to a job interview at a grocery store," Jessica muttered, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Marcus heard some of it. He didn't react. He simply nodded politely as Ryan introduced him to a few people, then stood quietly near the corner of the room, his hands folded calmly. He wasn't used to parties. The music was loud, and the smell of perfume made his head spin a little. While everyone laughed and talked, he just watched quietly. He wasn't angry or shy. He was just different. Meanwhile, the classmates watched him like hunters. They smiled at him when he looked their way, then turned to each other and giggled when he looked away. They made fake small talk, with him asking silly questions that were really insults hidden behind polite words. "So, Marcus," Jessica said loudly so others could hear, "how's life as a single dad?" "Must be really hard to afford things." There was a short pause. Marcus looked at her, his eyes calm, and said softly, "It has its challenges, but it's worth it." Jessica blinked, not expecting him to answer so gently. She had hoped he would look embarrassed. Ryan jumped in quickly. "So, what do you even do when you're not, studying or babysitting?" he asked, smiling like it was a harmless question. "I spend time with my son," Marcus said. "And I work on a small tech project." "Oh, a project," Ryan repeated, pretending to be impressed while his friend snickered. "Like fixing old computers or something?" Marcus simply nodded. "Something like that." They burst out laughing the moment he turned away, covering their mouths to hide their mockery. The whole time, Marcus stayed calm. He listened to their Flashy stories about rich vacations and new cars, but he never tried to outdo them. He smiled politely and asked them questions, and they thought it was because he was trying to fit in. In truth, he wasn't trying at all. He just didn't care about proving himself. At one point, one of the boys whispered loudly enough for Marcus to hear. He probably lives in some tiny apartment with broken furniture. Another replied, I bet he takes the bus. Can you imagine him pulling up in a Ferrari? And they all laughed again. Marcus caught the words, but he let them float past him like smoke. They knew nothing about the quiet life he had built or the quiet fortune growing behind it. He wasn't there to impress them. He was there because, for some small part of him, he wanted to understand why they treated him like he was invisible. But as the night went on, the whispers turned sharper. They tried to get him to drink expensive wine, pushing glasses into his hand. He refused politely. They offered him strange hors d'oeuvres he had never seen, and when he declined, they exchanged mocking looks. He's so boring, Jessica whispered loudly, rolling her eyes. Yeah, like a ghost in the room, Ryan muttered. And yet, Marcus still didn't break. He stood there, steady as a stone, quietly watching, quietly listening. None of them realized that the calmness they thought was weakness was actually strength. They thought they were winning. They thought they were humiliating him. But while they were busy mocking, they didn't see what was coming the moment when everything they believed about him would collapse. For now, they only saw a man in a worn jacket standing silently at their golden party, and they whispered, and whispered, and whispered. Marcus stood quietly near the wide glass window, holding a glass of plain water. He wasn't trying to blend in, he simply didn't feel the need to perform like the others. Around him, laughter echoed through the elegant living room as the classmates continued showing off stories about wealth, vacations, and luxury brands. Their voices rose and fell like waves, full of energy and pride. But Marcus, he was still. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't shy. He just observed, calm and centered, as if he was standing on an island while they were all caught in a storm of their own egos. His face stayed gentle, his posture relaxed, his eyes soft. Every now and then, someone tried to pull him into their conversation, not to include him, but to test him to see if he would stumble. Marcus, you don't talk much, said one boy named Ethan, tilting his glass with a grin. Are we too loud for you, or are you just not used to being at parties like this? Marcus smiled faintly. I'm just more comfortable listening, he said. Ethan raised his eyebrows, almost disappointed that Marcus didn't look embarrassed. He turned away, muttering something under his breath. Then Jessica walked over, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. So Marcus, she said sweetly, though her tone had a sharp edge, you never post anything on social media. Everyone else does. Don't you want people to know what you're doing with your life? Marcus looked at her calmly. I like keeping my life private, he said. I prefer living it, not displaying it. Jessica blinked, thrown off for a second. She had expected him to stumble, to laugh nervously, or to make excuses. Instead, he spoke as if he had nothing to prove. He didn't. While they laughed, while they boasted, Marcus's mind wasn't on impressing them. He was thinking of his son, of the bedtime story he had read to him before leaving the house tonight, of the tiny note his son had left on his desk, saying, "Good luck at your party." Dad, that little note meant more to Marcus than anything else in the room. The others couldn't see it. But every calm breath Marcus took was anchored in love and responsibility. Every patient smile came from a place of quiet strength they didn't understand. Around him, their arrogance grew louder. They didn't know why he didn't react. Maybe he's just used to being invisible, one boy whispered. Maybe he's scared, another replied. But Marcus wasn't scared. He was patient. When someone accidentally spilled a drink near him, he quickly bent down and helped clean it without complaint. When the music grew too loud, he didn't flinch. When someone made a cruel joke about single fathers, he just smiled politely and let it pass. Inside, he felt no anger, only clarity. He had been through worse. There had been nights when he had stayed awake till 3 a.m. coding on his old laptop while his baby son slept beside him. There had been days when he couldn't afford lunch but still went to class with a straight back and steady eyes. There had been years when people laughed at his dreams, told him he would fail, told him he should give up, but he never raised his voice. He never fought back with anger. He simply worked harder, moved quietly, and proved them wrong in silence. Tonight, surrounded by fake smiles and expensive shoes, he felt like he was looking at his past, at all the people who had once doubted him, and he felt no need to fight them. Ryan, standing nearby, watched Marcus carefully. The calmness annoyed him. He had hoped Marcus would fidget, blush, or look awkward. Instead, Marcus stood like he belonged, there like he could not be touched by their shallow judgment. "Man, you're really—" "Chill," Ryan said finally, walking up to him. Most people would be nervous here. Marcus looked at him with the same gentle smile. "I'm used to being where people don't expect me to be," he said simply. Ryan didn't know how to respond to that. He laughed awkwardly and walked away, pretending it didn't bother him, but it did. Something about Marcus's composure made the room feel different, like he was the only real person there, and everyone else was just pretending. The night moved on. Laughter rose, music played, glasses clinked, but Marcus never changed. He stayed calm, kind, and steady, like an anchor in the middle of their noisy ocean. Some of them began to wonder if maybe he wasn't nervous, 'cause he had nothing to be nervous about. Maybe he knew something they didn't. They didn't realize how right they were, because beneath that calmness was a man who had built something extraordinary in silence, who had survived storms they could never imagine, and while they were trying to make him feel small, Marcus already knew he wasn't small. He was just quiet, and soon, that quiet would speak louder than all of their noise. The night had grown louder and brighter. The living room was now glowing with soft golden lights while music played steadily in the background. Laughter echoed against the glass walls as Ryan's classmates huddled in small circles, showing each other photos on their phones, bragging about vacations, or telling dramatic stories about how stressful their rich lives were. Marcus remained near the window, quietly watching the lights of the city twinkling far away. He didn't fidget, didn't try to join their conversations, didn't reach for attention. He looked perfectly at ease in his corner, but something small began to shift. It happened almost by accident. One of the boys, David, was loudly explaining how his father's company had just signed $1 million deal. He waved his hands dramatically as he spoke, enjoying the gasps and nods of admiration from the others. "My dad says I'll be CEO by 30, David boasted. Can you imagine the pressure? Handling that kind of money is exhausting. A few people nodded seriously, pretending to understand. Then someone turned and looked at Marcus with a teasing grin. "What about you, Marcus?" the boy asked loudly. "Any $1 million stress in your life?" Everyone laughed, expecting Marcus to shrug or look awkward. Instead, he just smiled softly. "Money isn't stressful if you see it as a tool, not a trophy," he said calmly. The laughter paused. Just for a second, it was such a simple sentence, yet it sounded different from anything they'd been saying all night. His voice was calm, measured, almost like someone who had actually handled stress far bigger than theirs. Then Jessica laughed quickly to cover the silence. "Wow, deep words from the quiet guy," she said, rolling her eyes lightly. The others chuckled again, brushing it off, but Ryan's eyes narrowed just a little. There was something about the way Marcus had said it without flinching, without trying to impress, that made Ryan strangely uneasy. A few minutes later, when the group shifted toward the kitchen, Marcus followed quietly. On the marble counter sat a sleek Bluetooth speaker that had stopped playing music because it had disconnected. Everyone stood around, tapping at their phones. Complaining, Marcus reached out silently, pressed 2 buttons, and reconnected it in seconds. "There you go," he said gently, stepping back. "Oh," Ryan muttered. "Thanks." It was nothing big. But for the first time, they saw how quick and confident Marcus's hands were, like someone used to solving technical problems without thinking. "Where'd you learn to do stuff like that?" one boy asked. Marcus shrugged. "Just part of my work." "Work?" Jessica tilted her head, pretending to be curious. "What kind of work?" "You said something earlier about a project, right?" Marcus nodded slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I run a small tech firm. Mostly software solutions. I do it from home so I can stay with my son." They all froze for a second. Then Ryan burst out laughing. "A tech firm? At home? What does that even mean? Like fixing Wi-Fi for your neighbors?" Laughter erupted around the counter. They pictured Marcus hunched over a broken laptop in a tiny apartment, while his kid cried in the background. But Marcus didn't react. He simply smiled, like their laughter didn't touch him at all. "Asterisk. Something like that," he said softly. And he walked back to the living room, calm as ever. But that tiny moment didn't fade from their minds as easily as they serve. As music played again and people went back to dancing, Ryan caught himself glancing at Marcus now and then. There was something about the way he moved, quiet but certain, distant but never lost. He didn't act like someone struggling. He acted like someone who knew exactly where he stood, even the way he held himself straight-backed. Relaxed shoulders, steady eyes wasn't how poor or insecure people usually looked when surrounded by wealth. It was how confident people looked when they didn't care about proving anything. Ryan tried to shake it off, laughing louder than usual, but something small had cracked inside his certainty. Jessica, too, noticed something. She had been watching Marcus from across the room while pretending not to. When someone mentioned an upcoming business internship, Marcus had quietly offered a clever suggestion about market analytics, something so specific that even she, who came from a family of entrepreneurs, had never heard of. And when she looked up his suggestion on her phone just to check, she was surprised to find it was accurate. Very accurate. She said nothing, but for the first time all night, she wasn't laughing at him. Marcus, unaware or maybe simply unconcerned, sat on the edge of a leather armchair, calmly sipping water while everyone around him shouted over each other. He looked like a completely different kind of person, someone who belonged to a quieter, stronger world they had never seen. The classmates didn't know what to do with that feeling. They had invited him here to laugh at him. But now, tiny threads of doubt had started weaving through their arrogance. They still believed he was poor. They still believed he was out of place. But something about him didn't fit that picture anymore. Something about him didn't fit their world of gold-plated pride, and though they didn't know it yet, this tiny shift, the first spark of doubt, was the beginning of their awakening. Asterisk, the party was beginning to thin out. Some classmates were already gathering their coats, still laughing and exchanging loud goodbyes. The music had softened to a gentle hum, and the golden lights now felt warmer, slower. Outside, the city lights glimmered against the dark night. Marcus was still there, sitting quietly on the arm of the leather sofa. He had barely moved all night, yet somehow he looked more grounded than anyone else in the room. His calmness was almost unsettling now. Ryan watched him from across the room as he poured himself another drink. He had laughed at Marcus for hours, but the laughter had grown weaker. Something about Marcus didn't add up. How could someone who seemed so ordinary carry himself like that? Not nervous, not desperate, not even interested in impressing anyone. Just still, like a man who already had everything he needed. Ryan hated not knowing things. He was used to being the center, the one with the loudest stories and the richest background. Marcus's quietness was starting to feel like a secret. And secrets made Ryan restless, so when Marcus finally stood up, thanked everyone politely, and said he should be heading home, Ryan's curiosity exploded. "Wait," Ryan said quickly, walking up to him. "You're just leaving?" "That's it." Marcus smiled. "Yes, my son's probably waiting for me." "It's bedtime." He shook Ryan's hand firmly, nodded at the others, and walked out into the night. The room went quiet for a moment after the door closed. Then Ethan muttered, "He's so weird." Jessica folded her arms. Or maybe just boring. But Ryan wasn't satisfied. Something about Marcus's words, "I run a small tech firm," was stuck in his head like an itch he couldn't scratch. So, while people were still chatting and laughing around him, Ryan quietly slipped his phone out of his pocket. He typed Marcus's full name into the search bar. The results loaded in seconds. And then, Ryan froze. At first, he thought it had to be someone else with the same name. He clicked on the top result, a business article from a major tech magazine. A photo loaded on the screen. It was Marcus, standing in front of a modern office building, wearing a sleek suit, smiling with his young son sitting on his shoulders. The headline read, "Tech visionary Marcus Reed raises $25 million in latest funding round startup, valued at $100 million. Ryan's glass slipped from his hand and clinked against the marble. Table tapped. His heart pounded as he scrolled. Article after article appeared: interviews, investment profiles, awards. Words jumped out at him: founder, CEO, multi-million-dollar valuation. Forbes under 30. There were photos of sleek offices, employees working at glass desks. Marcus standing in front of a company logo Ryan had actually heard of before, an app everyone on campus used without knowing who built it. It was him, Marcus, the man they had just mocked for wearing an old jacket. The man they had whispered about like he was nothing. The man they had thought was beneath them. Ryan's mouth went dry. He handed the phone to Jessica with trembling fingers. "Read this," he whispered. Jessica glanced at it carelessly. Taya. But her expression changed almost instantly. Her eyes widened, and her face drained of color. "No." She whispered, "This. This can't be real." But it was. Soon everyone had crowded around the phone, scrolling with frantic fingers, reading the same words again and again because their minds refused to believe them. Marcus was rich. Not just rich, staggeringly successful. Quietly, secretly, while they were flaunting their parents' money, he had built his own empire from scratch. He wasn't just surviving. He was thriving beyond anything they could imagine. A heavy silence swallowed the room. The music kept playing softly, but no one heard it anymore. Ryan sank onto the couch, staring at the floor. He felt small, smaller than he had ever felt in his life. All evening, they had treated Marcus like he was beneath them, like he didn't belong. But he had belonged more than any of them. Marcus hadn't needed expensive clothes or loud stories. He hadn't needed to prove anything, because he already was everything they were pretending to be, and he had walked out of the party without once rubbing it in their faces. That stung the most, because if any of them had his kind of money, they would have been shouting it from the rooftops. But Marcus had sat quietly with a glass of water and smiled. While they laughed at him, now they understood why he could stay so calm. Why their arrogance never touched him. Why he never flinched when they mocked him. He had already climbed the mountain, they were still. Pretending to see from a distance, Ryan swallowed hard. His chest felt tight, his pride shattered. Around him, his friends sat in stunned silence, each of them lost in their own shame. They had invited Marcus to humiliate him. Instead, he had silently revealed who they really were, and none of them would ever forget it. Asterisk. The night air outside was cool and silent as Marcus walked down the stone steps of Ryan's house. He zipped his old jacket, hands in his pockets. His mind already drifting to thoughts of home, his son probably asleep by now. The soft glow of the nightlight in their small but warm living room. The half-built Lego castle waiting on the coffee table. He had no idea that. Behind him, chaos was unraveling. Inside the house, the group of arrogant classmates still sat frozen around the marble counter, their expensive drinks untouched. The music had stopped, though none of them remembered turning it off. Ryan's phone lay in the center like a bomb, still glowing with Marcus's face on the screen and the headline that had shattered their world. Marcus Reed's startup reaches $100 million valuation. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Jessica finally whispered, "We?" We mocked him. David swallowed hard. We laughed at his clothes and his shoes, Ethan said hollowly. Ryan's chest was burning. He felt something unfamiliar crawling through him, not anger, not even shame exactly, but something deeper. He had never felt small in his life. But right now, he felt like a child who had just been caught playing with paper crowns while a real king quietly passed by. "I can't just let him walk away like that," Ryan muttered suddenly, standing up so fast the stool tipped over. "Ryan?" "Don't," Jessica began, but he was already running to the door. Outside. Marcus was just unlocking his old car when he heard hurried footsteps on the gravel driveway. "Marcus." He turned. Ryan was coming toward him, face flushed, breathing fast. For the first time all night, Ryan didn't look proud or confident. He looked unsure, almost nervous. "Hey," Marcus said calmly. "Did I forget something?" Ryan stopped a few feet away, struggling for words. We looked you up," he admitted, his voice low. Marcus's expression didn't change. "I see. You." Ryan's throat tightened. "You're worth $100 million. Marcus looked at him quietly for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Something like that. The words hit like thunder. Even though Ryan had seen the articles, hearing it from Marcus's mouth made it real in a way that sank into his bones. Ryan laughed once, but it came out broken. "We spent the whole night laughing at you. And you just sat there. How? How could you sit there and let us treat you like that?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, his eyes soft but steady. "Because what you think about me doesn't change who I am," he said simply. Ryan blinked. The words felt like stones dropping into a still lake, rippling out through everything he believed about life. You could have told us," Ryan said desperately. "You could have shut us all up in 1 second. Why would I need to?" Marcus asked gently. "People who need to prove their worth usually haven't found it yet." Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. He had never heard anyone speak like that, not proud, not angry, just calm, like the truth didn't need to be loud. Marcus glanced at the house. Through the window, he could see the others watching from behind the curtain, faces pale and silent. He spoke without looking at them. "When I was younger, I used to want people to see me," he said quietly, "to know what I could do. But then I realized, the people who only see your clothes or your car will never see you even if you stand on a stage and shout. So I stopped shouting." Ryan swallowed hard. There was a sting in his chest that felt like guilt. "I thought we were better than you," he whispered. Marcus smiled faintly, not cruel, just sad. "That's the thing about arrogance," he said. "It blinds you to the truth. You were so busy looking down that you never saw what was standing right in front of you." Ryan had no answer. His pride had drained away, leaving him hollow. For a long moment, they stood in the quiet driveway under the cold night sky. Ryan, the golden boy who had mocked him. Marcus, the quiet father who had built an empire in silence. Finally, Marcus opened his car door. "Go home, Ryan," he said gently. "And next time? See people for who they are, not who you think they aren't." He got into his car and drove away slowly, taillights glowing red until they disappeared into the dark street. Ryan stood there long after the car was gone, the night colder now, heavier somehow. Inside the house, the others waited silently for him, their laughter long dead. None of them said a word when Ryan walked back in, because every single one of them knew. Marcus hadn't just left the party. He had left them standing in the ruins of their pride. The house felt different after Marcus left. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all of it had drained away as if someone had pulled a plug and let the entire night swirl down into silence. What was left behind wasn't peace. It was heavy. Like the air itself had turned to stone. Ryan shut the door softly behind him when he came back in. No one said a word. They just stared at him as if he had returned from some faraway world. In a way, he had. Marcus's name still glowed on Ryan's phone screen on the marble counter. The headline stayed there like a scar, refusing to disappear no matter how many times someone turned the screen off and on. $100 million. They had mocked a man who had built something none of them could even imagine. Jessica was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "We laughed at him, and he didn't even defend himself." "That's what makes it worse," whispered Ethan. "He didn't need to." They sat in a loose circle now, but no one could look at each other. Their perfect clothes and shiny watches suddenly felt childish, like cheap costumes. David rubbed his hands over his face. "Do you guys understand what this means? We were busy bragging about our internships and Daddy's companies while he created his own empire from nothing. And we treated him like dirt because he wore old shoes," Jessica said bitterly. "Because he wasn't showing off like us." Ryan sank into a chair. His chest hurt in a way he couldn't name. He kept hearing Marcus's calm voice in the driveway. "People who need to prove their worth usually haven't found it yet." It echoed like a bell inside his skull. All night they had been performing, throwing their wealth and arrogance around like confetti, desperate to seem important. And Marcus had simply been. No performance, no noise, no desperate need to be seen. And somehow he was the only one who truly mattered. A thick guilt wrapped around them, each of them lost in their own storm of shame. Jessica spoke again, quieter now. "Do you know what hurt the most?" "What?" Ryan asked. "That he was kind. Even when we mocked him, he stayed kind. We were cruel. And he was kind." No one argued. Because it was true. For the first time, they started seeing him clearly, not as the quiet, single dad, not as a classmate who wore old jackets, but as a man who had survived more than any of them had ever faced, and had still chosen kindness over pride. Ryan thought about how Marcus had smiled softly at their jokes, how he had answered their fake curiosity with patience, how he had quietly asked about their dreams instead of talking about his own. He'd been the richest man in the room all along, not just in money, but in character. And they had been too blind to see it. Ethan's voice cracked. "We were trying to make him feel small. But we were the small ones." Ryan didn't reply. He just stared down at his expensive watch, the one he had been flashing around earlier like a badge of worth. It suddenly looked like a toy on his wrist. No one had ever made him feel small before. He had grown up believing he was destined to be admired. But tonight had shown him the truth. Admiration meant nothing if it came from arrogance. Respect was what mattered, and they hadn't given any. The room stayed silent for a long time. No one touched their drinks. No one dared to turn the music back on. In the corner, the leftover desserts sat untouched, looking out of place now, like props from a party that didn't exist anymore. Finally, Jessica stood. "I'm going home," she whispered. Her eyes were glassy. One by one, they followed, leaving quietly without their usual goodbyes. Their heels and polished shoes clicked against the floor, echoing hollow in the empty house. Ryan stayed behind alone. He sat in the dark, staring at the empty chair where Marcus had sat. He remembered how Marcus had straightened that old jacket as if it were armor. How he had smiled with tired eyes. How he had left without needing to prove anything. Ryan thought about Marcus's son. About the life Marcus must live, building an empire with one hand and holding his child with the other, and doing it all with grace. Tears stung Ryan's eyes before he even realized he was crying. He had everything Marcus didn't have: wealth, family name, status, and yet Marcus had everything Ryan didn't: dignity, strength, peace. For the first time in his life, Ryan hated the version of himself he had become. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry," but Marcus wasn't there to hear it. And maybe that was the point, because regret, Ryan realized, is something you carry alone. Asterisk. Marcus drove home through the quiet streets, the glow of streetlights sliding across his windshield like falling stars. The city was asleep, but his mind was calm, still echoing with the shallow laughter that had filled that house, and the sudden silence that followed when truth had broken through. He didn't hate them. He wasn't even angry. He just felt done. His small car hummed softly as he pulled into the driveway of his modest two-bedroom house. From the outside, it looked like any other house on the block. Nothing about it screamed wealth or power. And that was how Marcus liked it. He unlocked the door gently and stepped inside. The living room was dim, lit only by the warm yellow glow of a nightlight shaped like a tiny moon. Toys were scattered across the carpet. On the couch, curled up beneath a blanket with a stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm, was his son, Jordan. Marcus smiled. He slipped off his shoes and knelt beside the couch. For a long time, he just watched his son breathe, the small chest rising and falling like soft waves. This was why none of the mockery mattered. This was why he could sit there quietly while they laughed. Why he didn't need to defend himself or throw his success in their faces. Because nothing they said could touch what mattered most to him. He gently brushed Jordan's hair back and whispered, "Daddy's home." Jordan stirred but didn't wake. Marcus picked him up carefully, cradling him against his chest, and carried him to his room. He tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and stood there for a moment, watching the peaceful innocence in his sleeping face. Then Marcus whispered to himself, as much as to his son, "One day, you'll understand. We don't have to shine to be bright." He turned off the light and closed the door quietly. The next morning, miles away, the classmates woke in their separate homes to the hollow aftermath of shame. Jessica stared at her ceiling for hours, remembering Marcus's calm eyes, his gentle smile while they mocked him. She opened her closet full of designer clothes and for the first time thought they looked like masks instead of treasures. That day, she donated half of them to charity. Ethan couldn't bring himself to open social media. His usual feed of luxury cars and parties suddenly looked meaningless. Instead, he sat with his little sister for hours, helping her build a puzzle, realizing he had never really slowed down to see her before. David walked past the mirror in his expensive apartment and almost didn't recognize the person looking back. He had always believed power meant being admired. But Marcus had shown him that real power was quiet, invisible, steady. That day, David applied for a volunteer position at a local youth center. Unsure why, but needing to be part of something that wasn't about himself and Ryan. Ryan didn't leave his room for most of the day. He sat at his desk, staring at the books and awards lining his shelves. All of them felt weightless. He thought about how Marcus had walked into that party wearing old shoes and walked out as the only giant among them. He replayed Marcus's words over and over in his mind. People who need to prove their worth usually haven't found it yet. Ryan realized he had spent his whole life trying to prove his worth through grades, cars, parties, and shallow smiles. But Marcus didn't need to prove anything. He just was. That night, Ryan picked up his phone. His finger hovered over Marcus's name. He wanted to apologize. To say he was sorry for every cruel word, every smug laugh, every moment of blindness, but he didn't send a message because he knew an apology spoken too soon would be just another performance, and Marcus didn't need performances. Instead, Ryan made himself a quiet promise. He would become the kind of man who could sit in a room and not need to be noticed, because his worth would speak for itself. Weeks passed. The classmates still crossed paths with Marcus at college sometimes. He always nodded politely, never bitter, never cold, just calm. They no longer mocked his clothes or whispered behind his back. In fact, they fell silent when he passed, not out of fear, but out of quiet respect. And Marcus? He remained the same, still wearing his old jacket, still walking with quiet steps, still heading home each evening to the boy who thought his father was the greatest man in the world. Marcus never mentioned the party again. He didn't need to, because the real lesson had already rooted itself deep inside them all. True greatness never shouts. It simply stands tall in silence, until the world learns how to see it.